Thank you. And thanks a lot for the organizers for having me here. It's my first time in Serbia, so I'm really excited. It's really exciting and interesting in many aspects. And I'm going to talk about a couple of different experiences and about 7 different studies in crowdsourced policymaking. And let's start with I think there's a, was there a clicker? I think it's here. So I'll talk first about the definition and the process. What do we mean when we talk about crowdsourcing and policymaking? And then I talk about values and challenges, and I hope I will have time to talk about what actually motivates the crowd and who are the crowd members who participate. So let's start with the definition. So how I define crowdsourcing is that it's an online task for anybody to participate in. So it's distributed problem solving. And what's really important to note is that the locus of the power is within the crowdsourcer, so the one who organizes the crowdsourcing moment. So in the cases that I will talk about, the crowdsourcers are always local and national governments. And if you compare crowdsourcing to commons-based career production, which is another very common online collaboration method that we use in Wikipedia writing or open source software production, so we see that the difference is huge in terms of power hierarchies, because in commons-based career production, the power is within the commons, the producers, whereas in crowdsourcing, the crowdsourcer, the government has much more power. So this is important to have in mind when we think about these examples that I'll show. And now let's travel to Finland, to the country where I'm from, and I'm going to show in practice what crowdsourcing and policymaking means. And I'll start with an example of the crowdsourced off-road traffic law. In Finland, we have snow most of the year round, especially in northern part of Finland, where I'm from. So we drive around with snowmobiles a lot in the winter. And we have a law governing this type of off-road traffic. Off-road traffic is traffic that happens beyond the established routes and roads. So it's snowmobile riding in the winter, and it's ATV riding in the summer. And this law has 2 purposes. It should ensure the safety of people who are doing off-road traffic, and also it should protect the nature. But now there's been a lot of debate in Finland about the functionality of this law. And there's a lot of criticism that this law is outdated and should be revised. So then our Ministry of the Environment, Mr. Minister, who is here on the left, he finally decided, okay, let's then reform the law. But let's reform the law in a new way. Let's involve the citizens in the reform process. And that's how we got started. So we wanted to implement crowdsourcing in lawmaking. So what happened was that we set up an online platform where there was more information about the law and the pressure to reform it. And then people were invited to submit their ideas about how to reform the law. And these were categorized in different categories, for instance, how to improve safety, how to protect the nature better, what should the edge need to be, and so on. And then these ideas would pop up on the platform, and people would comment on those and leave likes up and down votes on those. And we have a couple of similar cases like this. The Ministry of Justice crowdsourced people's feedback to limited liability housing company law, which governs all the condominium buildings, which are apartment buildings in Europe, I guess. So the law governs about 3 million people in Finland. And then in the US, I worked with the city of Palo Alto in California, where we crowdsourced people's feedback for an urban planning strategy. It's a master plan for the city for the next 15 years that determines the future of the city. And the process is always very similar. So there's a crowdsourcing moment, and then where the crowd is invited to participate in. And then the civil servants, so the urban planners in the city, they take people's feedback, they analyze it and synthesize it. Then they start and they do policy drafting. They might crowdsource people's feedback to the draft. And then again, they analyze and synthesize the feedback. And so the process goes on until the policy is ready and it's being published and implemented. And so if we take a step back and think about what is the role of crowdsourcing in a typical policymaking or lawmaking process. So let's look at an example here. So this is how a lawmaking process works in Finland. So it's the civil servants in the government who draft the bill, and then they are commissioned by the parliament or the government, and they consult interest groups and expert committee that they may set up, and they work on the bill together. And then the bill goes to the parliament, and the parliament has the decision decision-making power over the bill. So they decide whether the bill is accepted or not. And now we're going to introduce the crowd to this process. So the crowd functions as an additional data point to the civil servants, meaning that they bring up knowledge that the civil servants can use. But the decision-making power is still within the parliament. And we apply this model in local decision-making. So we should think about the parliament as the city council, and the civil servants, they're not in the government, but they're the local city staff members. So why this is important to think about is that crowdsourcing is not a method for direct democracy. So the crowd doesn't have decision-making power. So we're not doing like voting or anything. It's looking for knowledge from people. But also it's important to note that crowdsourcing is not public opinion polling. We're not doing preference aggregation in the cases that I'm talking today, because crowdsourcing is always based on self-selection. So it's not a representative sample of people. Like we know in social sciences that you should have a random sample of people when you do opinion polling, and crowdsourcing is never the case because people already, they have decided to participate when they come to the platform. So as contrast to participatory budgeting, which is another method for open government practices, which is about direct democracy. How many of you know about participatory budgeting, by the way? A couple of people. So I just quickly explain what it is so you see the difference. So in PB, how it works is that a city or neighborhood in a city decides to allocate part of its capital budget for the residents to decide about. So the residents first come up with proposals, how the money could be used. For instance, we need a new dog park, or we need a new road here, this and that. And then at the end of the policy cycle, what happens is that there's elections. So anybody who is eligible to vote, who is typically all the people who live in the area and have a proof of that, they come and vote of these proposals. For instance, here is some examples of a PB process in Boston last year. So there's about 20 measures, 20 proposals in the ballot, and then people come and vote. And then that result is binding, so the city has to implement those projects. And if you're interested in PB as a method for direct democracy, you can find out more on our website, Stanford.edu. There's a lot of materials about this project. But when we talk about crowdsourcing and policymaking, we're not doing direct democracy. It's very important, so I emphasize it. So then you might have a question, like what is the value then? If people are invited to participate, but they can't decide. So why do we do it? So we have analyzed that there's three aspects in value in crowdsourced policymaking. There's democratic, there's epistemic, and there's economic value. And if you think about democratic value, so that goes in 4 different axes here. So we have transparency, accountability, deliberation, and empowerment. And transparency works in 2 ways. So there's vertical transparency from the government to the public, because now the public knows that, oh, this law or this policy is being reformed. And also that works other way, that now the crowd can communicate directly to the government that this is happening, like this is what we think about this law and these are our ideas. And also there's horizontal transparency between the crowd members, because now on the platform, when people can see each other's ideas and comments, they can see what everybody else is thinking about this topic. And then this can lead to stronger accountability, because with the vertical transparency, the crowd can demand from the politicians and from the government that, because now they have more knowledge about the policy-making reform, they can go back to the government, to the representatives, to the authorities, and say, look, why was this law reformed this way, even though there were all these other great ideas? So that pushes the government to be more responsive. And responsiveness is part of government being accountable. And also, there can be accountability power in the horizontal transparency, because the crowd can also self-organize. Let's say you're not happy with the off-road traffic law, and you find a group of fellow people on the platform thinking the same way, so you can self-organize and come up with ideas and measures how to influence the law. Another aspect in the democratic value in crowdsourcing is deliberation. So, and that happens horizontally on the platform, and people can comment on each other's ideas and so. For instance, here we see part of a very long comment thread that who started by a specific idea in one of these crowdsourced policymaking efforts. And we actually found that the quality of deliberation, according to pretty demanding standards set up by political theorists, can be pretty good, even though it's a self-selected, anonymous crowd, and there's post-moderation on the platform, but people are not trolling, there's no hate speech, and there's really good reasoning and justification of arguments. And then the last aspect in this value is citizen empowerment. So what happens when people come on the platform and they start participating? So when we did interviews with the participants, this is a representative quote about their experience on the platform. For instance, one person said that this is actually the first time in my lifetime when I feel that I'm really participating in making democracy and influencing decision making in this society. It feels much more real than just voting for some person. So you can see that this person, this participant has been voting elections, so he's an active citizen in that way, but still this 1 minute or 2 minute contribution on a crowdsourcing platform gives this really profound experience of empowerment. And here we can meet one of the participants in the off-road traffic law reform. He's called Jaska. He lives just by the Arctic Circle in Finland, so very mildly north. And he participated with this, you might see his little bit unclear, but he had this little Android tablet device, and he participated really actively by using this device just sitting in his living room. And because he lives in a very remote area, it's about 1 hour from any post office or anywhere, so he has to commute a lot to make any difference. So for him, participation in crowdsourcing was a really profound experience because for him, his law is very important. He has some reindeer that he herds in Finland and he uses snowmobile to herd his reindeer. So snowmobile is just not for fun, but it's also for work. And for people like Jaska, the experience can manifest like this. The only way to make a difference from out here in the country is really online. All other activity means you have to drive around in your car all evening to get somewhere. It's pretty impossible. So this way, he was able to access the policymaking process in a more easy, more suitable way for him, and it made him to feel more physically and mentally closer to the policymaking process. And then the second aspect in value creation is epistemic, and epistemic here means knowledge related, so knowledge producing value, basically. And so we can see that when people share information on the platform, that's how we can access to that knowledge. There's two types of knowledge. There's experience-based knowledge, so situated knowledge, people like Jaska who live in that remote village. So how is it for him to ride his snowmobile? Like, are the regulations fitting to his daily practices and what he would like? And in other part of Finland, those experiences might be different. And then there's expertise-based knowledge, kind of the more standard thinking of knowledge that you have to have some education or kind of status-based background to have knowledge, because on the platform there were lawyers and legal drafters and people who have that type of knowledge who also shared that. And when we use crowdsourcing in this type of a policymaking process, what happens is that we extend the knowledge search to the citizens' knowledge neighborhood. And that's how we can actually have a higher chance to access different types of knowledge spaces, whether it's situated or expertise-based knowledge. And that can increase our probability to navigate, find the right peaks in the knowledge landscapes, so you always would like to find the local optima. And now that you have a large number of people whose knowledge you're accessing, you might be able to do it faster and in a more efficient way. And by doing that, we harness the people's knowledge, collective intelligence, trying to channel it to policymaking process so that we could use the two virtues of collective intelligence, diversity and large crowd, and then channel it meaningfully to the policymaking process. And then finally, thinking about the economic value of policymaking. So when we can access people's knowledge, collective intelligence, their knowledge, we can actually then find their needs in terms of that policy in a faster and more efficient way than organizing meetings where people have to travel or communicating only with the lobbyist groups and interest groups who only have a few representatives representing the knowledge that now we can access hundreds and thousands of people. And Pripik and Shukla, good colleagues working on crowdsourcing too, they have defined this as the crowd capital that we can access through crowdsourcing. And then when we know, or the government knows, the citizens' needs better, that may lead to a more efficient service delivery and better policies that match people's needs better. And then, of course, on the other way around, when we think about the people's experience, when they have participated in making of a policy, they may be more committed to these decisions too. And if you think about the knowledge search aspect and the economic value of finding knowledge fast, so there's good examples from other realms beyond policymaking and governance, for instance, Innocentive, which is an intermediary for companies and other organizations to solve also pretty complicated R&D problems. How many of you know about Innocentive, by the way? Just a few people. So it's basically a platform where any company organization can go and post an R&D challenge. Like here, it's a pretty, it's a chemistry problem. Anybody can go and try to solve the problem. There's a monetary reward for it. And then for the company, it can be really beneficial to crowdsource these problems and try to find solutions this way so that they don't need to hire that expertise to the company. And they can see these different solutions without additional cost. So if we try to then apply this model to government, of course, there's a lot of precautions and things that we have to think about in terms of democratic practice. But if this dynamic, if this method works in other realms, I don't think there should not be any reason why it wouldn't work in policymaking either. And then finally, let's think about challenges in crowdsourced policymaking a little bit. One of the main challenges that I want to talk about today is analysis and synthesis that Petya also referred to briefly. So this is what typically happens in a crowdsourced policymaking process. You get piles of unstructured data that accumulates on your spreadsheets. And so it's the civil servants in the government who often don't have any training in data analysis. So it's all of a sudden it's their job to go through all these spreadsheets, try to figure out some kind of a reliable and transparent model to analyze and categorize these data sets. And you can think of how much politics is involved in this too. So actually then what happens is that there's this situation we call the civic data overload. So you see the poor civil servants, whoever who is responsible of the crowdsourcing projects in the government, they're actually drowning into the data. So it's very paradoxical because at the same time, we want to have as many people as possible to participate, to maximize the value of collective intelligence and also increase the legitimacy of the crowdsourcing process and also increase the democratic aspects so that we be more inclusive and so on. But then at the same time, you end up to this civic data overload situation. So this is how the situation looks like. So we have the citizens' input here in the bottle, but then there's this huge bottleneck that we can't get out because there's lack of analysis and synthesis methods that would work well with this type of data, which is unstructured. And then the civil servants or as researchers are trying to pull up that cap. And this bottleneck is a serious problem because in many, many projects that we have been working on, everything works out beautifully until we hit the point that, okay, somebody has to analyze all the input. And then if the civil servants in the government, if they have the time or resources, they might be able to do it. They might be able to hire consultants. But still, in these cases, we are still talking about maybe some 4,000 comments, which is not that much. But think about if it's going to be 10,000 or a million comments, you are not going to do that with human resources. And then another related challenge to this is, okay, even though you got this data categorized, we use some machine learning methods to classify the categories. For instance, if you have a policy about transportation in the city of Palo Alto, so we were able to classify pretty reliably ideas, whether they are about public transit or private transit. So that's like one step further. But still, we are not getting any analysis of also what are these ideas really about. Like people have so many, they might have long comments, a paragraph or one page or just 2 sentences. So it's not very reliable method yet. And then we hit the other challenge, which is, so what is the quality of the ideas? How useful the knowledge that is crowdsourced, how useful it is for the government? Well, we don't oftentimes even know it because there's so much of that input that the government doesn't have any meaningful way to analyze it. So then the final part of this talk is going deeper in the participants' perspective, the crowd's perspective, which we oftentimes overlook when they think about platform building and engaging the citizens. We think that they automatically come to these platforms and the world will be beautiful after that. But this is how the crowd typically manifests to us. It's a crowd that has a mask on, and they might look exactly the same to us, even though they are very different from when you unmask them. So that motivates us to study in many of these processes who are the people who participate, because you remember they are anonymous, and also why do they come there? What would be the motivation factors that could sustain their participation? So this is where we go back to Jaska and his fellows' perspective, trying to figure out what is the role of crowdsourcing in his life, and why is it meaningful for him to try to influence the policy through crowdsourcing. And if you think about participant profiles, so this is really interesting in just looking into some of these demographics. So it's mostly educated men, from 60 to 80% of the participants are men. So there is no gender equality on the platforms, unfortunately. What's interesting with the age distribution is that it varies based on the topic of the policy. So in the crowdsourced off-road traffic law case, the age distribution was pretty equal, so that there were younger age group, there was a middle age group, and the older age group was smaller, but it was there. But then with the housing company law, it was really interesting that most of the participants were actually senior. So it was older people who participated, and that's against the general assumption that we think that, oh, it's only the young hippie crowd who lives in the city who participates in anything that's digital. Well, that's not the case. And of course, there's factors that influence the demographics, the limited liability housing company law. A lot of people who own apartments are really active regarding this law because, of course, the law regulates also how their valuable property that's 2 million euros or however valuable it is. So you care about that law more than if you don't own an apartment. And the probability of owning an apartment goes up the older you are. So that makes sense, and it's a rational way to think about the participation. But also, this type of demographic skews are really problematic when we think about processes that are supposed to enhance and improve our democracy. How can we say that this is a good process for our democracy because there's such a big participation bias? When we think about the civic activity in the participant profile, so this is really interesting too. So here we have some metrics for civic activity. There's voting, 72%, and then there's writing op-eds, contacting your local or national representative, and so on. So we say that the participants are a mixed bag of people. There's the usual suspects, who are the people who are already civically pretty active. About 30% of the people had already been in touch with their member of the parliament or a local city council member to impact policies. And most of the people voted in elections. So these are not the people who are kind of in the periphery of civic participation, those who are the more passive ones and those who we would like to engage. So in that way, we are only amplifying the participation bias that we have in society already. And this is another big challenge and a problem in many of these crowdsourced policymaking processes and also in other participatory and direct democracy projects. For instance, in participatory budgeting, the participation rate is the maximum can be 5% of the eligible population who vote in the PB elections. And again, it's the same participation bias. It's the educated people who already vote in other elections too and who are civically active. But I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing these initiatives because of that, but I'm saying that we should pay more attention how to try to engage those who are not already active, because that's the easiest population to engage. And then when we think about the motivation factors in participation, so we find extrinsic, and it's a mix of extrinsic and intrinsic motivations. So extrinsic motivations are motivations that give us some tangible reward. Like for instance, if I participate and if I get some monetary value out of it, if I try to change the law so that my property value would go up. So that would be an extrinsic reward. Or if I participated, for instance, in Wikipedia writing, if people participate so that their reputation would improve and so that's extrinsic value. Whereas intrinsic values are something that there's no immediate tangible reward. We might do it for enjoyment, for fun, or just for more altruistic reasons. And in crowdsourced policymaking, this is the motivation factors are a mix of these intrinsic and extrinsic factors. And so the strongest drivers are very rational. People come to the platform because they want to change the law to a certain direction, a direction that would benefit them. So it's rooted in self-interest, as a lot of the political participation is. They want to solve problems that are related to their practical lives, whether it's they can't write their snowmobile in a certain way, or they can't write it as fast as they want, or the renovations in apartment buildings don't happen the way they want. Also, they come to discuss with others and to learn, but these are also rooted in self-interest in the sense that they come to learn and to discuss with others because they want to be able to be in a stronger position to improve the law. So they don't come inherently because of social factors. And then the intrinsic factors include sociotropic reasons like, oh, we have to protect the nature, we have to make sure that we have a nature for the next generation too, and that's why I want to have the law changed so that it protects nature better. Or some other similar reasons that are more altruistic, like, oh, we have to change the housing company law so that it would ensure a more equal distribution of the property value, and things like that. So we can see that this is an interplay of epistemic factors that are really related to knowledge sharing and producing and learning, but then also interactive factors because you have to interact in order to learn. And what's really interesting is that we found in these processes, we find saturation point where the level of participation activity goes down, so people start to contribute less with ideas and comments and votes. And then at the same point, around the same time, the motivation factors weaken too. So people start to disengage. So here we had 2 crowdsourcing stages in the housing company law reform. And these are the number of ideas. This is the time in the crowdsourcing process. So you see there is a peak, so that's the saturation point, and then after that, the amount of contributions go down. So, and the curiosity that we had was like, well, why is that, and how could we predict the saturation point, and what might be the motivation factors that could sustain participation even when the saturation point is approaching. And what we found is that all the other motivation factors decrease, so they become weaker. For instance, the desire to improve the law, solve problems, discuss with others, they decrease. And it's because we needed interviews with people trying to understand why is this. So we found that, well, it's because when they participate, they have higher expectations about their efficacy in terms of how much they can change the law. But when they participate, they understand, oh, there's this huge diversity of people and variety of opinions, and the problems are more complex. They realize this is not going to be as easy as I thought because my idea is not the only one. And that's when the motivation factors go down and also they start to disengage. But then what we found was that learning was the factor that's remained consistent. That was the only factor that even after 2 crowdsourcing stages, after several months, and there was 12 months in between, learning was still the strongest factor, which is really important when we design this type of platforms and processes, that when we know that, okay, we enhance learning in all possible ways, in the process and also in the technology, so then it's more likely that people would stay engaged longer and they are more motivated to return to the process because most likely you will have many sequences, not just one crowdsourcing sequence. with this, if you're interested in any of these aspects more, there's a lot of findings on the website, thefinishexperiment.com, of all these studies, not only the Finnish one, even though the website was set up some years back, so I didn't have the US cases yet. And thank you, everybody, for having me here, and I'm happy to have all your comments and questions. Thank you. So there's a, yeah. Oh, can you talk closer to the mic? Yeah, now it's better. Right, so the question is about how do we try to prevent rallying troops to achieve certain type of result of the crowdsourcing effort. Is that what you meant? Yeah, exactly. So, I go a step back, like I said earlier in the presentation, that because we don't do, the crowd is not part of the decision-making process of the policy. It's still the elected representatives, whether it's the members of the parliament or the city council members who are elected representatives, so they decide about the policy. So the crowd, it doesn't, like, even though you had 1 million of your supporters of a certain policy measure on the platform, it's still not a decision. And then the other aspect is that because we are looking for knowledge, not for opinions, we are not doing preference aggregation in the sense that we are not asking people, would you like to change the law to A, B, or C? You know, like opinion polling, should Finland join NATO or not, you know? We have preset amount of options there. Whereas in crowdsourcing, we operate in an earlier stage of a policymaking process. So the crowd contributes to the problem definition, to the data gathering, developing options, evaluating the policy drafts and the existing law. But then the designing, drafting, decision-making, and implementation, that's still the traditional authorities who have the power. And then how we synthesize and analyze the crowdsourced input has this, we do it in this model in mind, because when we have, let's say you have an idea to change the law here in Belgrade so that there would be, you would think that parking should be free at all times, or also at the pedestrian streets in the city of Belgrade. And let's say you rallied all your friends to support and repeat the idea 100 times on the platform. So, but that doesn't count into anything when we analyze the input. So the frequency of your idea manifesting on the platform doesn't make it more important in the end result. And that's what we always tell to the governments who do these processes, that you have to think about this in advance when you design the process, when you design the platform, when you design the idea submission forms, that it's not about, you're not going to calculate now there was 1,000 times this idea and only one time opposing idea saying that no, pedestrian streets should remain free of parking, car parking. Because then the government looks at, oh, here's all these ideas about how to improve parking in the city of Belgrade. So these are all just one unique data points. And then the government should evaluate these ideas the way they evaluate any ideas that they get from interest groups and so on. Yeah. Just hold on, he'll give you a mic.
Sorry, but then you can have 1 million votes for something, and you should go one by one and thinking about somebody's opinion. Is it possible to
yeah, so that's exactly the challenge. So it's not votes. So it's ideas. It's it would be easy if it was vote, because it would be structured data. But this is exactly the problem that I was describing here, was that when we have so much input, you have that 1 million ideas about how to improve parking in the city of Belgrade. So it's going to look like this. So who's going to analyze it? How are you going to classify these to different categories? That there's ideas about increasing parking permits around parks, or doing this and that. So we used to have to categorize them. And then you have to see what these ideas really say. So it requires a lot of human labor. And that is one major big challenge. And I would love to hear your ideas how to solve that challenge. As I say, we tried machine learning. There's promising approaches, but it's still very basic.
So I have a question. So it seems that the crowd is a kind of source of knowledge and proposals. And so do you have any feedback when the crowd sends a proposal to the government? Do you have a feedback from the government there? And also, is there a feedback within the crowd? How do they deliberate? Or
Yeah, the great question. So feedback from the government. So in good cases, when governments that we advise listen to us, and so there's a feedback loop that works really nicely. So after each crowdsourcing stage, there is like a feedback report that the government prepares and publishes online and sends an email to everybody who participates that now your input has been gathered and analyzed, and these are the trends. We see that there's ideas about this and that, and the government would inform the participants like what are the next steps, and if there will be the next crowdsourcing process, when would that start, and if there's going to be offline meetings, because oftentimes these are larger processes, that there might be like community meetings. So all that feedback loop is super important, because that tells people that their participation has been taken seriously, and this is not just like political window dressing to have some open government process, which we could do in any country. But then if you really want to enhance democracy, you need to have that accountability loop. And then the other question was about the deliberation. So yeah, there is deliberation, even though none of these processes that I spoke about today, they were not designed for deliberation. So they were designed for knowledge search. Like, give us your idea. You can talk about it with others too, but we're going to take your idea and we're going to look into it, how it would somehow fit and improve this law. But deliberation happened organically. So people started talking with each other. They started developing each other's ideas further. And then we just published a paper this year about the quality of deliberation, which was surprisingly good in terms of reciprocity, respect, justification for arguments, common good orientation, like 12 criteria that applied from political science, from deliberative democracy theory. So, and deliberation is really important when we think about the motivation factors. Learning was the only factor that we could say that could sustain participation based on the findings that we had. So deliberation contributes to learning. So the more deliberation there is, the more learning there might happen. But then we have to be also careful, because are you designing the process just for deliberation? Yeah. It's a different type of process than if the primary goal is still epistemic, get that knowledge, looking for knowledge for the policy.
And just one more question. Yeah. How do you evaluate your system? How do you evaluate? One case is when you have your crowdsource input versus no crowdsource, because you don't have the data. So how do you know what works, what doesn't?
So if your question is that, how could we measure whether a crowdsourced policy would be better than other one? Yeah. So now there's a first paper ever out about that. It's by my co-author Ellen Landemore, who's a professor at Yale University, and she did a really interesting study about the crowdsourced constitution process in Iceland that you might have heard of, and she compared, because in that case there were multiple policy drafts that she could compare that had like equal standing in the final decision making. So there was the crowdsourced one, there was the the previous one, and so on. And the conclusion that she made, this is published in the Journal of Politics just a few months ago, and her conclusion was that, yeah, the crowdsourced policy was more advanced, more progressive, so it was more democratic based on the criteria that she used. But this is a very rare case, that you have multiple drafts that you can compare these aspects in terms of, like, is it a better policy? And what is a better policy? Typically, well, in political science, we would use this type of, is it more democratic, is it more fair? But there might be other basis for comparison. Is it more efficient service delivery and so on? But those things would be only measured by behavioral data later on. You know, like, is this service now delivered better? Is it more cost efficient than the older one or the other one? But typically, we don't have possibility for such analysis.
Okay, then thanks again our speaker.
Thank you.